I worked in government security. What I discovered about the reptilians changed my life. 15 years of government security work teaches you to recognize when something doesn't fit the established patterns. And the phone call I received at 0547 hours on a Tuesday morning in October carried all the warning signs of an assignment that would either advance my career or end it completely. The voice belonged to Deputy Director Sarah Hendricks, a woman I'd worked with twice before on operations that required the kind of discretion that comes with mandatory amnesia clauses in your employment contract. "Agent Rodriguez," she said, using my formal designation, despite the fact that we'd shared drinks after the Senator Williams protection detail 3 years earlier. "You're being reassigned effective immediately to a project that will require you to forget everything you think you know about standard operating procedures." Her tone carried the kind of professional detachment that suggested she was reading from a script, rather than engaging in normal operational communication. I'd been through enough classified briefings to recognize when someone was being deliberately vague to avoid leaving electronic records of sensitive information. But this conversation felt different, more careful, more controlled, and somehow more dangerous than anything I'd encountered during my 15-year career, protecting high-value targets and securing classified installations. "Pack light. Tell nobody where you're going and report to Building 7 at Andrews Air Force Base at 1400 hours, she continued. "Bring your standard protection gear, but leave all personal electronic devices at home. This assignment operates under protocols you haven't encountered before." The line went dead before I could ask any of the questions that immediately flooded my mind, leaving me staring at my secure phone in the pre-dawn darkness of my apartment, trying to reconcile the implications of what I'd just heard with everything I thought I knew about government security operations. The drive to Andrews Air Force Base gave me time to review everything I knew about my career trajectory and the circumstances that had led to this unexpected reassignment. I'd started as a Marine Corps security specialist, spent 8 years protecting embassies and military installations in some of the world's most dangerous locations, and had transitioned to civilian government security 5 years ago, when the physical demands of military service began taking their toll on my 40-year-old body. My security clearance was secret level, with compartmentalized access to specific operations, which was high enough to handle most VIP protection assignments, but nowhere near the level required for the kind of deep black operations that existed in the spaces between official government acknowledgement and plausible deniability. My service record was clean, my psychological evaluations were consistently positive, and my personal life was stable enough to pass the kind of background investigations that accompanied sensitive assignments. But I couldn't identify any specific qualifications that would make me an ideal candidate for whatever Project Serpentina involved. The name itself was intriguing. Most classified operations used randomly generated code names that bore no relationship to their actual functions, but Serpentina suggested either someone had a sense of humor about operational security, or the name was intentionally chosen to convey information about the assignment's nature. As I approached the gate at Andrews, I found myself wondering whether I was being promoted to a position of greater responsibility and trust, or whether I was being moved into an assignment that would require the kind of sacrifices that came with operations that officially didn't exist. Building 7 at Andrews Air Force Base was not a structure I had visited during my previous government assignments, and its appearance immediately suggested that I was entering a level of classified operations that exceeded anything in my previous experience. The building looked like standard military architecture from the outside, institutional concrete and steel designed for function rather than aesthetics. But the security protocols for gaining access were more sophisticated than anything I had encountered at other government facilities. My identification was verified through biometric scanners that analyzed not just fingerprints and retinal patterns, but also vocal stress patterns, body temperature variations, and what appeared to be electromagnetic signatures that I couldn't identify, but which clearly provided information about my physical and psychological state. "Agent Rodriguez," said the security officer who processed my credentials. "You're expected in conference room Delta 7. Take the elevator to sublevel 3, turn right, and follow the blue line until you reach the briefing area." His instructions were delivered with the kind of mechanical precision that suggested he had repeated them many times before, but his eyes carried a wariness that made me wonder what kind of briefings typically took place in conference room Delta 7. The elevator descent to sub-level 3 was longer than it should have been for a 3-story drop, suggesting that the building extended much deeper underground than its surface appearance indicated. As the elevator doors opened onto a corridor that looked more like the interior of a spacecraft than a military facility, I realized that my 15 years of government security experience had prepared me for many situations, but probably not for whatever was waiting in conference room Delta 7. The briefing room was occupied by 12 people who looked like a cross-section of government agencies and military services, but something about their collective presence felt carefully orchestrated rather than randomly assembled. Deputy Director Hendricks sat at the head of a conference table that seemed to be made from a single piece of black material that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite stone, while the other attendees included individuals wearing military uniforms from various branches of service, civilian clothes that suggested intelligence agencies, and what appeared to be academic credentials that didn't quite fit the security contractor profiles I was accustomed to seeing in classified briefings. "Agent Rodriguez," Hendricks said as I took the single empty chair at the table. "Welcome to Project Serpentina. What you learn in this room will be classified at levels that don't appear in any manual you've read, and your continued access to this information will depend on your ability to adapt to operational requirements that exceed standard government protocols." She gestured to a wall display that showed organizational charts, facility layouts, and personnel profiles that looked like standard briefing materials, but which included elements that immediately caught my attention as unusual. The organizational chart showed a command structure that extended above the level of cabinet-level officials. The facility layouts included underground installations that weren't marked on any maps I had ever seen, and the personnel profiles included individuals whose ages and service records didn't align with normal career progression patterns. "Your primary assignment," she continued, "will be providing security for individuals in meetings that require protection protocols beyond anything you've encountered in conventional government operations." The way she emphasized individuals suggested that the people I would be protecting weren't entirely conventional either. The security clearance documentation I was required to sign included clauses and restrictions that went far beyond anything I had encountered during my previous assignments, including provisions that essentially gave the government unlimited authority to monitor, relocate, or if necessary, eliminate me if I ever compromised the security of Project Serpentina operations. "This level of clearance," explained the legal officer who witnessed my signature on documents that would never be filed with any standard government archive, "grants you access to information and operations that could fundamentally alter your understanding of government function, international relations, and the nature of the individuals who occupy positions of leadership in various sectors of society." His warning carried implications that made me question whether I was being offered a promotion or recruited into a situation that would make my previous life impossible to maintain. The psychological evaluation that followed my security briefing was more extensive than anything I had experienced during my military service, including assessments of my ability to process information that contradicted established beliefs, my capacity for maintaining operational security under extreme stress, and my willingness to follow orders that might conflict with my personal moral framework. "Agent Rodriguez," said the psychologist who conducted my evaluation, "your psychological profile indicates strong capabilities for adapting to unusual circumstances while maintaining emotional stability and operational effectiveness." She paused to review notes that I couldn't read from my position across her desk. "However, the assignment you're being considered for will require you to witness and participate in activities that may challenge your fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself." The clinical way she delivered that warning suggested that challenges to reality were routine aspects of Project Serpentina operations, rather than metaphorical descriptions of classified work. The equipment issue process revealed immediately that Project Serpentina operated with resources and technology that exceeded anything available to conventional government security operations. My standard protection gear was replaced with equipment that looked superficially similar to what I had used during previous assignments, but which incorporated features and capabilities that seemed to be decades ahead of anything I had encountered in military or civilian security applications. The body armor was lighter and more flexible than standard protective equipment, but testing revealed that it could stop projectiles that would penetrate conventional armor, while the communication systems included encryption capabilities and range characteristics that exceeded the specifications of equipment used by Special Operations Forces. This gear is specifically designed for the unique requirements of Project Serpentina operations, explained the equipment technician who fitted my new protective equipment. The threats you'll be protecting against include conventional weapons and tactics, but also some methods that aren't covered in standard security training programs. When I asked for clarification about unconventional threats, he looked uncomfortable and suggested that operational briefings would provide more specific information about what I might encounter in the field. The weapons I was issued included standard sidearms and rifles, but also devices that I couldn't immediately identify and which came with instruction manuals that were classified at levels requiring special compartmentalized access even within Project Serpentina. Some of the individuals you'll be protecting, the technician continued, have unique physiological characteristics that require specialized security considerations, and some of the locations where you'll be operating include environmental factors that exceed the parameters of conventional protective equipment. His explanations raised more questions than they answered, but the clinical way he discussed unique physiological characteristics and environmental factors suggested that Project Serpentina dealt with situations that were far outside the normal scope of government security operations. My first operational briefing took place in a secure facility that existed in the spaces between official government acknowledgement and public awareness. Located in a building that appeared on satellite imagery, but wasn't included in any directory of federal installations. The briefing materials included personnel files for individuals I would be protecting, facility layouts for locations where I would be operating, and operational protocols that combined standard security procedures with elements that seemed designed for situations I couldn't immediately categorize or understand. Your primary assignment, said Commander Patricia Walsh, the Project Serpentina Operations Director, will be providing security for individuals who hold positions of significant authority within government and private sector organizations, but who require protection protocols that exceed those available through conventional security services. The personnel files included photographs and biographical information for politicians, business leaders, and international figures that I recognized from news coverage, but the files also included medical information, psychological profiles, and behavioral characteristics that seemed unusually detailed and somehow inconsistent with what I would expect from normal background investigations. These individuals, Walsh continued, participate in meetings and activities that are essential to national security, but which cannot be conducted using standard diplomatic or governmental protocols. She showed me facility layouts for buildings that looked like ordinary office complexes and government installations, but which included underground areas and specialized rooms that seemed designed for purposes I couldn't identify from architectural drawings alone. The meetings you'll be securing, she added, occur outside normal business hours and often involve participants who prefer to avoid the kind of public attention that typically accompanies high-level governmental and corporate interactions. The operational protocols for Project Serpentina included security procedures that were more sophisticated than anything I had encountered during my previous government assignments, but they also included elements that seemed designed for protecting against threats that didn't appear in conventional security manuals. Standard protocols included perimeter security, access control, and threat assessment procedures that were familiar from my previous experience, but they also included provisions for what were described as environmental anomalies, physiological irregularities, and behavioral modifications that suggested the people I would be protecting might require specialized medical or psychological support during meetings and travel. Some of the individuals you'll be securing, explained Operations Specialist Maria Santos during my protocol briefing, have medical conditions that require specific environmental controls, including temperature regulation, atmospheric composition, and lighting conditions that must be maintained within precise parameters. When I asked about the nature of these medical conditions, she explained that the information was compartmentalized and would be provided on a need-to-know basis as I gained experience with specific assignments. Additionally, she continued, some meetings involve participants who prefer to conduct business during specific time periods, often late at night or very early in the morning, which requires security teams that can operate effectively during extended periods of reduced visibility and altered normal scheduling. The protocols also included communication procedures for situations where normal radio and telephone systems might not function properly, backup plans for evacuating personnel whose medical requirements made standard emergency procedures inadequate, and contingency measures for dealing with what were described as operational complications that exceed the scope of conventional security threats. My first assignment was scheduled for the following evening, providing security for what was described as a diplomatic consultation involving several high-ranking government officials and private sector representatives who would be meeting in a location that wasn't listed in any official directory of federal facilities. The meeting location, Commander Walsh explained during my final briefing, is a facility that provides the kind of privacy and security required for discussions that involve information too sensitive for conventional governmental or corporate meeting spaces. She handed me a sealed envelope containing facility layouts, personnel files, and operational instructions that I was authorized to open only when I arrived at the assignment location. Your role will be perimeter security and access control, she continued. But you should be prepared for the possibility that the meeting participants may have requirements or characteristics that differ from what you've encountered in previous security assignments. The warning was delivered with the kind of professional detachment that suggested unusual requirements were routine aspects of Project Serpentina operations, but it also carried implications that made me wonder what kind of characteristics would require special mention in a security briefing. Agent Rodriguez, she concluded, your 15 years of government security experience have prepared you for most aspects of this assignment, but you should understand that Project Serpentina operations sometimes involve situations that aren't covered in conventional training programs. As I left the briefing room carrying my sealed instructions and specialized equipment, I realized that I was about to begin an assignment that would either represent the pinnacle of my security career or introduce me to aspects of government operations that would fundamentally alter my understanding of what my career had actually involved. The facility around me hummed with activity that felt both familiar and somehow alien, and I found myself wondering whether the next 24 hours would provide answers to questions I didn't yet know how to ask, or whether they would simply replace my current confusion with an entirely new set of mysteries that would be even more difficult to understand or accept. The drive to my first Project Serpentina assignment took me through areas of Washington, D.C. that I thought I knew well, but following the directions in my sealed envelope led me to a building that somehow existed in the spaces between my mental map of the city and the reality of what was actually constructed there. The facility appeared to be an ordinary office building from the outside, but the security checkpoints, electronic surveillance systems, and access controls were more sophisticated than anything I had seen at other government installations, while the parking areas included vehicles that looked like standard government fleet cars, but which incorporated features that seemed designed for capabilities beyond normal transportation requirements. As I approached the main entrance following protocols that required me to arrive exactly at the specified time rather than early or late, I noticed that the other security personnel moving around the perimeter carried equipment similar to what I had been issued, but their movements and positioning suggested they were prepared for threats that exceeded anything covered in standard protective training. Agent Rodriguez, said the security coordinator who met me at the entrance. Welcome to your first Project Serpentina operation. Tonight's assignment will provide you with an introduction to the kind of situations you'll be handling on a regular basis. His tone carried the kind of professional courtesy that suggested he had conducted similar introductions many times before, but his eyes held a wariness that made me wonder what kind of situations required such careful preparation of new personnel. Follow me, he continued, leading me into a building that looked completely ordinary from the outside, but which immediately revealed itself to be far more complex and sophisticated than any standard office facility. As we walked through corridors that seemed to extend much deeper into the building than the exterior dimensions would suggest, I realized that my 15 years of government security experience had prepared me for protecting conventional people in conventional locations. But tonight's assignment would introduce me to aspects of government operations that existed in the spaces between official acknowledgement and public understanding, and I was about to discover that the people I would be protecting weren't entirely conventional either. The first week of Project Serpentina operations established patterns that violated every principle of normal government security work I had learned during 15 years of protecting high-value targets. The meetings I was assigned to secure consistently occurred between 200 and 500 hours. When normal government business was suspended and most federal buildings were operating with minimal security and maintenance staff, the individuals you'll be protecting prefer to conduct business during periods of reduced public activity, explained Operations Coordinator Stevens during my second-day briefing, though his explanation didn't address why powerful politicians and corporate executives would choose to meet during hours when most normal people were asleep. The meeting locations rotated between facilities that weren't listed in any directory of federal installations, private buildings that looked like ordinary office complexes, but which included security systems more sophisticated than anything I had encountered at other government sites, and underground spaces that seemed to extend much deeper than their surface access points would suggest. Standard security protocols apply, Stevens continued, but you should be prepared for the possibility that meeting participants may have scheduling and operational requirements that differ from conventional governmental or corporate business practices. His warning was delivered with the kind of professional detachment that suggested unusual scheduling was routine for Project Serpentina operations, but it raised questions about why powerful people would consistently choose to conduct important business during hours when they should have been sleeping. The behavioral patterns I observed during my first week of assignments included anomalies that were subtle individually, but collectively suggested that the people I was protecting operated according to different physiological and psychological principles than normal human beings. Senator Patricia Williams, whom I had protected during a previous assignment 3 years earlier, seemed to have no recollection of our previous professional relationship, despite the fact that we had worked together for 6 weeks during a high-threat period that should have created memorable interactions. When I mentioned specific incidents from our previous assignment, she looked at me with the kind of blank incomprehension that suggested either severe memory problems or the possibility that I was mistaking her for someone else entirely. "I'm sure you're confusing me with someone else," she said, when I referenced a conversation we had shared about her concerns for her family's safety, though her personnel file confirmed that she was the same person I had protected previously. Her physical appearance was identical to my memories, but her mannerisms, speech patterns, and behavioral responses were subtly different in ways that suggested either significant personality changes or the possibility that I was interacting with someone who had studied her behavior patterns without actually being the same individual. The disconnect was subtle enough that I might have dismissed it as normal variations in human behavior under different circumstances, but combined with other anomalies I was observing, it suggested that something more significant was affecting the people I was assigned to protect. The most disturbing pattern involved the complete absence of normal human physiological responses to fatigue, hunger, and environmental stress during extended meetings that would have exhausted normal participants. During a 7-hour consultation that extended from Oro 200 to Oro 900 hours, I observed 12 meeting participants who showed no signs of fatigue, never requested breaks for food or restroom facilities, and maintained consistent energy levels throughout a discussion that would have left normal people physically and mentally drained. "Some individuals have exceptional stamina for extended business discussions," explained my shift supervisor, when I mentioned the unusual endurance levels I had observed, though his explanation didn't address why multiple participants would share identical physiological characteristics that exceeded normal human capabilities. More concerning was my observation that none of the meeting participants consumed any food or beverages during sessions that extended across normal meal periods, despite the fact that catered refreshments were always available, and that normal government meetings typically included regular breaks for eating and drinking. When I asked Operations Coordinator Stevens about dietary restrictions or medical conditions that might explain the consistent avoidance of food consumption, he told me that meeting participants had specific nutritional requirements that are managed through specialized protocols, but that the details were compartmentalized information that I wasn't authorized to access. His evasive response suggested that the unusual eating patterns I had observed were intentional and systematic rather than coincidental. The temperature preferences of the people I was protecting consistently exceeded what most humans would consider comfortable, with meeting rooms maintained at levels that left me sweating through my protective equipment, while the participants appeared perfectly comfortable in business suits and formal attire. Conference rooms were kept at temperatures between 85 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which was warm enough to make extended periods of physical activity uncomfortable for normal security personnel. but which seemed to be optimal for the individuals conducting business inside those rooms. Some of our clients have medical conditions that require specific environmental controls, explained Facility Manager Davis when I requested permission to adjust the HVAC systems in meeting rooms where I was assigned to provide security. The temperature and humidity levels are maintained according to specifications that ensure optimal comfort and performance for meeting participants. When I asked about the nature of the medical conditions that required such warm environments, he told me that health information was protected by privacy regulations and that security personnel weren't authorized to access medical details about the people they were assigned to protect. However, my observation of multiple individuals who shared identical environmental preferences suggested either an unusual medical coincidence or the possibility that the people I was protecting shared physiological characteristics that differed from normal human temperature regulation. The consistency of these preferences across different individuals and different meeting locations indicated systematic rather than coincidental patterns. The communication methods used by meeting participants included elements that seemed designed to avoid creating electronic records or other forms of documentation that could be accessed by normal government oversight or intelligence analysis. Conversations frequently occurred in whispered tones that made it difficult for security personnel to overhear specific content, despite the fact that normal government meetings typically included discussion levels that allowed protective details to monitor for potential security threats. Business discussions sometimes involve sensitive information that requires discretion, explained Operations Specialist Martinez, when I mentioned the difficulty of providing effective security when I couldn't clearly hear what was being discussed in the meetings I was assigned to protect. Your responsibility is perimeter security and access control rather than monitoring conversation content. However, during the few occasions when I was positioned close enough to overhear fragments of conversation, the speech patterns and linguistic characteristics suggested either highly specialized technical terminology or the possibility that participants were using communication methods that weren't entirely based on standard English language structures. Some conversations included sounds and vocal patterns that seemed more like coded communication, or possibly even non-human linguistic elements, though the acoustic conditions in meeting rooms made it difficult to analyze these observations with confidence. The consistent use of communication methods that avoided normal documentation and oversight suggested that Project Serpentina meetings dealt with information that was classified at levels exceeding anything I had encountered during my previous government security assignments. The personal habits and behavioral characteristics of the individuals I was protecting included patterns that suggested either highly disciplined personal routines or physiological differences that affected their interaction with normal human environments and activities. During my first week of assignments, I never observed any of the meeting participants consuming alcohol, coffee, or other beverages that normal government officials typically used for social lubrication or energy management during extended business sessions. Instead, they consistently requested specific types of water that were provided through specialized catering services, and that seemed to have unusual mineral content and temperature characteristics. Some individuals have dietary restrictions that require carefully controlled nutrition and hydration, explained catering coordinator Thompson when I asked about the specialized beverage requirements that seemed to be universal among Project Serpentina meeting participants. The water and other refreshments are prepared according to specifications that ensure optimal health and performance outcomes. Kata. When I requested permission to sample the specialized refreshments to ensure they hadn't been contaminated or tampered with as part of my security responsibilities, Thompson told me that the beverages were formulated for specific physiological requirements and that consumption by unauthorized personnel could cause adverse reactions. His warning suggested that the specialized refreshments were designed for people whose nutritional and physiological needs differed significantly from normal human requirements, which raised questions about whether the individuals I was protecting were entirely human, or whether they had medical conditions that required dietary management beyond anything I had encountered during my previous security assignments. The scheduling patterns for Project Serpentina meetings consistently avoided periods when normal government business was conducted, with virtually all sessions occurring during late night or very early morning hours, when federal buildings were operating with reduced staffing and when normal oversight and monitoring systems were less active. The individuals you're protecting have demanding schedules that often require them to conduct business during off-peak hours, explained Deputy Director Hendricks, during my one-week evaluation meeting, though her explanation didn't address why multiple high-ranking officials would share identical preferences for conducting important business when they should have been sleeping. The consistency of the scheduling patterns suggested either carefully coordinated time management or the possibility that the people I was protecting operated according to circadian rhythms that differed from normal human sleep-wake cycles. More concerning was my observation that meeting participants seemed to be most alert and energetic during periods when normal humans would be experiencing fatigue and reduced cognitive performance due to disrupted sleep patterns. During 300 hours meetings, the individuals I was protecting displayed energy levels and mental acuity that suggested they were operating at peak performance rather than struggling with the physiological challenges that would affect normal people conducting business during their natural sleep periods. The biological implications of consistently optimal performance during late-night hours raised questions about whether the meeting participants were using pharmaceutical enhancement, had unusual sleep requirements, or possessed physiological characteristics that allowed them to function effectively, independent of normal human circadian rhythms. The interaction patterns between meeting participants included non-verbal communication elements that seemed more sophisticated and more systematic than normal human body language and gesture systems. During multi-participant sessions, I observed coordination and synchronization of movements, eye contact patterns, and positioning behaviors that suggested either highly developed group dynamics or the possibility that participants were using communication methods that supplemented or replaced normal verbal interaction. Some individuals have extensive experience working together and develop efficient communication patterns, explained behavioral analyst Dr. Sarah Chen, when I mentioned the unusual coordination I had observed during group meetings. What you're seeing is probably the result of long-term professional relationships and shared operational objectives. However, my observation suggested communication patterns that exceeded what would be expected from normal professional familiarity, including simultaneous gesture responses, synchronized movement patterns, and what appeared to be anticipatory behavioral responses that suggested participants were somehow aware of each other's intentions before normal verbal or visual cues would have provided that information. The sophistication of these interaction patterns suggested either training in specialized group communication techniques or the possibility that the meeting participants shared sensory or cognitive capabilities that allowed for more efficient information exchange than normal human communication methods. During one particularly striking example, I observed all 12 meeting participants simultaneously turning to look at a specific location in the room before any visible or audible stimulus occurred that would have drawn normal human attention to that area, suggesting either supernatural awareness or communication through channels that I couldn't detect or understand. The physical characteristics of the individuals I was protecting included subtle but consistent variations from what I would expect in a random sample of high-ranking government officials and corporate executives, with patterns that suggested either careful selection based on specific criteria, or the possibility that they shared genetic or physiological traits that weren't immediately obvious, but which affected their appearance and behavior. Most participants appeared to be in exceptional physical condition, despite ages and professional backgrounds that would normally be associated with sedentary lifestyles and stress-related health problems typical of people in high-responsibility government and corporate positions. Some individuals maintain very disciplined fitness and health management programs, explained Medical Liaison Officer Dr. Patricia Walsh, when I mentioned the unusual consistency of physical condition among Project Serpentina meeting participants. What you're observing is probably the result of access to advanced healthcare and fitness resources that aren't available to most government employees. However, the consistency of physical characteristics extended beyond what would be expected from normal health management, including skin quality, eye clarity, and movement patterns that suggested either genetic advantages or access to medical treatments that exceeded anything available through normal government or private healthcare systems. More subtle, but equally consistent were facial structure and body proportion patterns that seemed to follow similar parameters across different individuals, suggesting either coincidental genetic characteristics or the possibility that meeting participants were selected based on physical criteria that weren't related to their professional qualifications or government responsibilities. The implications of systematic physical selection raised questions about the criteria used for determining who was authorized to participate in Project Serpentina meetings, and whether those criteria were based on professional capabilities or other characteristics that weren't documented in official personnel files. As my first week of Project Serpentina assignments concluded, the accumulated evidence of behavioral, physiological, and operational anomalies had created a pattern that challenged my understanding of normal government security work and raised questions about whether the people I was protecting were entirely what they appeared to be. The consistency of unusual characteristics across different individuals, different meeting locations, and different operational circumstances suggested systematic rather than coincidental variations from normal human behavior and physiology. "Agent Rodriguez," said Commander Walsh during my weekend evaluation, "your performance during initial assignments has been satisfactory, and your security clearance is being upgraded to provide access to additional operational information as you continue to develop experience with Project Serpentina requirements." Her words carried the implication that my observations had been noted and evaluated, and that my continued involvement would involve exposure to information that would explain the anomalies I had documented during my first week of operations. "Your next assignment," she continued, "will involve providing security for a meeting that includes some of our most important clients, and you'll have the opportunity to observe operational procedures that aren't covered in conventional security training programs." As I prepared to leave the briefing room carrying instructions for an assignment that would apparently involve even more unusual circumstances than what I had already encountered, I realized that my 15 years of government security experience had prepared me for protecting normal people in normal situations, but Project Serpentina was introducing me to situations that existed in the spaces between normal human behavior and something else entirely, and my next assignment would provide answers to questions that were becoming impossible to ignore or rationalize away. The coordinates for my third week assignment led me to a location in downtown Washington, D.C. that existed in the space between my GPS readings and physical reality. According to my navigation system, I was standing in front of a small parking lot sandwiched between two office buildings, but my eyes were seeing a 20-story glass and steel structure that somehow occupied the same geographical coordinates without displacing the buildings that should have prevented its existence. "Agent Rodriguez," said Senator Patricia Williams as she exited the armored vehicle I had escorted from her residence, "this facility requires special access protocols that weren't covered in your standard briefing materials." Her tone carried the kind of casual familiarity that suggested she had used this building many times before, despite the fact that my 15 years of Washington, D.C. security work had never brought me to a location that I couldn't identify on official city maps. The building appeared solid and real from my position on the sidewalk, but when I checked my tactical mapping system, the GPS coordinates indicated empty space between two structures that were clearly visible in both satellite imagery and street-level photography. "The facility is equipped with privacy screening that prevents it from appearing in normal surveillance or mapping systems," Williams explained, though her explanation raised more questions than it answered about how an entire building could exist while remaining invisible to technological observation. As we approached the main entrance, I realized that I was about to enter a structure that challenged my understanding of both architecture and physics, and that the security protocols for this assignment would involve protecting people in a location that officially didn't exist. The security checkpoint at the building's entrance included screening procedures that exceeded anything I had encountered at other government facilities, involving technologies that seemed designed to analyze not just weapons and explosives, but also biological and possibly genetic characteristics of people seeking access to the building. The scanning equipment looked superficially similar to standard airport security systems, but the displays showed information patterns that included data categories I couldn't identify and measurement parameters that didn't correspond to normal threat detection protocols. "Agent Rodriguez," said the security officer who processed my credentials, "your authorization for this facility includes access to Level 7 conference areas, but some sections of the building require additional clearances that must be obtained through specialized request procedures." His instructions included warnings about areas of the building that were restricted not just for security reasons, but also for what he described as environmental compatibility requirements that suggested some spaces weren't suitable for normal human occupation. The scanning process took longer than usual and included procedures that seemed to be analyzing my biological characteristics rather than just checking for weapons or contraband. The building maintains specific atmospheric and environmental conditions, he continued, and some areas require occupants to meet particular physiological criteria for safety and operational effectiveness. His explanation suggested that different sections of the facility were designed for people with different biological requirements, which raised questions about who else was using the building and what kind of environmental modifications they might require for comfortable occupation. The interior of the building immediately revealed technology and design elements that exceeded anything I had encountered during my government security career, with systems and capabilities that seemed to be decades ahead of what I thought was available in civilian or military applications. The elevator that transported us to level 7 moved with unusual smoothness and speed, covering what felt like 20 floors in less time than normal elevators required for traveling 5 floors, while the corridor lighting systems seemed to adjust automatically to provide optimal visibility for each individual moving through the space. The building incorporates some advanced environmental control and efficiency systems, Senator Williams explained as we walked through hallways that seemed to be monitoring and responding to our presence in real time. These technologies aren't yet available for public or standard government use, but they're being tested in controlled environments like this facility. The walls appeared to be made from materials that combined the visual properties of marble or granite with the responsiveness of sophisticated display systems, showing subtle patterns and information displays that seemed to provide building status and navigation data directly to people who knew how to interpret the visual cues. More concerning was my observation that the building seemed to be analyzing and responding to our movements, with lighting, temperature, and even air circulation adjusting to provide optimal conditions as we moved through different areas. The level of environmental responsiveness suggested either incredibly sophisticated automation systems or the possibility that the building itself was equipped with some form of artificial intelligence that was monitoring and managing the experience of everyone inside the facility. The Level 7 conference room where Senator Williams was scheduled to meet with other Project Serpentina participants included features and capabilities that challenged my understanding of what was possible in meeting facility design and technology. The room appeared to be circular from the inside, despite the fact that the building's exterior suggested rectangular floor plans, and the ceiling extended upward beyond what should have been possible given the floor count I had observed from outside the building. The conference table was made from a single piece of material that looked like black stone, but which seemed to be generating its own subtle illumination and displaying information patterns that weren't visible from my security position near the entrance. The meeting room is equipped with advanced communication and information sharing systems, Williams explained, though the technology I could observe exceeded anything I had seen in other government or corporate facilities. The walls included display surfaces that seemed to be providing real-time information about topics that weren't identified in my briefing materials, while the seating arrangements included individual control systems that suggested each participant could access different data streams and communication channels during meetings. Most striking was the absence of normal electronic equipment like computers, phones, or recording devices, despite clear evidence that sophisticated information processing and communication was occurring throughout the space. The technology seemed to be integrated into the basic structure of the room itself, rather than consisting of separate devices that could be identified and evaluated using normal security protocols. The other meeting participants who arrived for the Level 7 conference included individuals I recognized from news coverage and previous security assignments, but their behavior and interaction patterns immediately confirmed that something fundamental had changed about the people I had been protecting during my previous Project Serpentina operations. As each person entered the conference room, they seemed to undergo subtle but unmistakable changes in posture, movement patterns, and facial expressions that suggested they were either adopting different personas or accessing capabilities that weren't evident during their normal public appearances. Senator Williams, whom I had escorted to the building, moved with fluid grace and alertness that exceeded anything I had observed during our previous interactions, while her eye contact patterns and spatial awareness seemed more sophisticated than normal human sensory capabilities would suggest. The meeting environment allows participants to operate at optimal performance levels, she explained when she noticed my attention to the behavioral changes I was observing. Some individuals have capabilities that are enhanced by the specific technological and environmental conditions provided in this facility. The explanation didn't address the nature of the capabilities she was referring to, but it suggested that the people I was protecting possessed abilities that required specialized environments for full utilization. As more participants arrived and took their positions around the conference table, the collective change in behavior and presence became impossible to ignore or rationalize as normal variations in professional deportment under different circumstances. The beginning of the actual meeting marked the moment when my assignment shifted from conventional security work to witnessing events that challenged every assumption I had developed about human physiology, technology, and the nature of the people I had been assigned to protect. As the 12 participants settled into their positions around the conference table, the room's environmental system seemed to respond to their presence by adjusting lighting, temperature, and atmospheric conditions to levels that made me increasingly uncomfortable while apparently optimizing conditions for the meeting participants. The temperature rose to levels that would normally be uncomfortable for people wearing business attire, while the lighting shifted to frequencies that made normal color perception difficult, but which seemed to enhance the visual acuity and alertness of everyone seated at the table. "Agent Rodriguez," said Senator Williams, turning to address me directly. "This meeting will involve discussion of information that requires security protocols beyond what you've encountered in previous assignments." Her voice carried subtle changes in tone and resonance that made her words seem more authoritative and somehow more compelling than normal human speech patterns would suggest. "Your role is to monitor perimeter security and ensure that the meeting proceeds without interference from unauthorized personnel or surveillance systems." As she spoke, I noticed that her eyes seemed to be reflecting light in ways that weren't consistent with normal human iris and pupil responses, creating an appearance that was subtly but unmistakably different from what I had observed during our previous interactions. The transformation that occurred approximately 30 minutes into the meeting began subtly, but escalated into changes that forced me to question everything I thought I knew about the biological limitations of the human body and the nature of the people I had been assigned to protect. Senator Williams, who had been speaking in normal conversational tones about what appeared to be routine policy matters, began to display physical characteristics that were impossible to reconcile with normal human anatomy and physiology. Her skin texture seemed to be changing from the smooth surface I had observed during our earlier interactions to something that had a subtle but unmistakable scaled or textured appearance, while her facial structure appeared to be shifting in ways that emphasized angular features and modified the proportions of her eyes, nose, and mouth. "The environmental conditions in this facility," she said, apparently unaware that her physical appearance was undergoing changes that should have been impossible, "allow for optimal physiological function and enhanced cognitive performance." Her voice was maintaining the same authoritative tone I had noticed earlier, but the sound seemed to be coming from vocal structures that were different from those that produced normal human speech. As I watched in growing disbelief, her transformation continued to progress, revealing characteristics that were clearly reptilian rather than mammalian, including eye structure, skin texture, and facial features that belonged to a species that wasn't human, despite her retention of human clothing, mannerisms, and speech patterns. The realization that all 12 meeting participants were undergoing similar transformations forced me to confront the possibility that my entire understanding of Project Serpentina, government security operations, and the nature of the people in positions of political and corporate leadership was fundamentally incomplete or incorrect. As the environmental conditions in the conference room continued to adjust to what were apparently optimal parameters for the meeting participants, each individual revealed physical characteristics that combined human and reptilian features in ways that suggested either advanced genetic modification or the possibility that they belonged to a species that was capable of disguising itself as human under normal circumstances. The transformations weren't random or chaotic, but rather seemed to follow consistent patterns that suggested systematic biological characteristics shared by all participants, despite their different backgrounds and professional responsibilities. "Agent Rodriguez," said Senator Williams, whose appearance now clearly displayed reptilian features while maintaining human clothing and professional behavior, "the information discussed in these meetings requires security protocols that account for the unique nature of the participants and the specialized requirements of our operational objectives. Her explanation was delivered with the same professional courtesy I had come to expect from government officials. But the cognitive dissonance of receiving normal bureaucratic explanations from someone whose physical appearance had shifted to reptilian characteristics made it difficult to process the information using normal psychological frameworks. The other participants continued their discussions using human language and familiar governmental and corporate terminology, but their physical appearances now clearly revealed that they weren't human beings disguised as reptiles, but rather reptilian beings who were capable of disguising themselves as humans under normal circumstances. The technology in the conference room seemed to be specifically designed to support and optimize the physiological requirements of beings whose normal appearance was reptilian rather than human, with environmental controls that maintained atmospheric conditions suitable for reptilian metabolism and sensory systems rather than human biological needs. The temperature and humidity levels that had made me increasingly uncomfortable were apparently optimal for the meeting participants in their revealed forms, while the lighting frequencies that had made normal color perception difficult seemed to be designed for reptilian visual systems that operated according to different parameters than human eyesight. The facility provides environmental conditions that allow participants to operate without the physiological stress of maintaining human appearance for extended periods, explained one of the other participants, whose transformation had revealed features that were clearly reptilian, but who continued to speak in fluent English, using familiar governmental terminology and concepts. These meetings require extended periods of concentration and decision-making that are more effective when participants can function according to their natural physiological parameters. The explanation suggested that the ability to appear human was a deliberate disguise that required energy and concentration to maintain, and that the specialized environment of the facility allowed them to operate in their natural forms while conducting business that required human knowledge and institutional access. The implications of discovering that people in positions of significant governmental and corporate authority were actually reptilian beings who were capable of disguising themselves as humans raised questions about the extent of their influence, the nature of their objectives, and the degree to which human civilization was being controlled or directed by non-human intelligence. As the meeting concluded and the participants began to resume their human appearances in preparation for leaving the facility, I realized that my role as a Project Serpentina security agent wasn't to protect human government officials from conventional threats, but rather to provide security for reptilian beings who are operating within human institutions while maintaining false human identities. The transformation process that I had witnessed in reverse as meeting participants shifted from reptilian to human appearance was just as remarkable as the initial revelation, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything I thought was possible in terms of biological modification or species adaptation. "Agent Rodriguez," said Senator Williams, who had completely resumed her human appearance, but whose behavior now carried knowledge that I had witnessed her true form, "your security clearance is being upgraded to include information about the specialized nature of Project Serpentina operations and the unique requirements of the individuals you'll be protecting." Her tone suggested that my exposure to their true nature had been planned and anticipated rather than accidental, and that my continued involvement would require acceptance of responsibilities that went far beyond conventional government security work. "Your next assignment," she continued, "will involve providing security for operations that require protection of participants whose safety depends on maintaining the secrecy of their true nature and the confidentiality of their activities within human governmental and corporate institutions." As I prepared to escort her back to the armored vehicle for return transportation, I understood that I had crossed a threshold from conventional security work into a role that involved protecting beings whose existence challenged everything I thought I knew about human civilization, and that my future assignments would require me to guard secrets that were far more significant than anything covered in standard government security protocols. The assignment that changed everything started as routine protection detail for Deputy Secretary of Defense Marcus Webb, during what was described as a standard interagency consultation at a government facility that I had secured dozens of times during my previous assignments. Webb was someone I had protected twice before during conventional operations, and his behavioral patterns and security requirements had always fallen within normal parameters for high-ranking defense officials who dealt with classified information and sensitive policy matters. "Agent Rodriguez," he said as I escorted him from his residence to the meeting location. "Today's discussion involves some highly sensitive information that may require extended security protocols." His tone was casual and professional, exactly what I would expect from a defense official preparing for a classified briefing. But something about his posture and movement patterns seemed slightly different from what I remembered from our previous professional interactions. The differences were subtle enough that I initially attributed them to normal variations in behavior under different operational circumstances. But as we traveled to the meeting location, I began to notice that his responses to conversation and environmental stimuli seemed more alert and somehow more intense than what I had observed during our previous work together. "The meeting today," he continued, "involves information that requires the kind of security protocols you've been learning through Project Serpentina. So you should be prepared for some operational procedures that might seem unusual compared to standard Defense Department briefings." His warning was delivered with the same professional courtesy I had come to expect from government officials, but it carried implications that made me wonder what kind of unusual procedures would be involved in a routine interagency consultation. The meeting facility was a standard government office building that I had used for previous security assignments, but the access procedures and environmental controls seemed to have been modified since my last visit to accommodate requirements that exceeded normal government meeting protocols. The conference room where Deputy Secretary Webb was scheduled to meet with other officials had been equipped with temperature and lighting controls that were set to levels that immediately made me uncomfortable, while the ventilation systems seemed to be maintaining atmospheric conditions that were noticeably different from what I would expect in a normal office environment. The environmental systems have been upgraded to provide optimal conditions for participants who have specific physiological requirements, explained Facility Manager Davis when I asked about the unusual atmospheric conditions. Some of the officials attending today's meeting have medical conditions that require carefully controlled temperature, humidity, and air circulation parameters. His explanation was reasonable and professionally delivered, but it raised questions about why multiple government officials would share identical medical requirements that necessitated environmental modifications to a standard conference facility. As other meeting participants arrived and took their positions in the conference room, I noticed that they all seemed to be comfortable with atmospheric conditions that were making me increasingly warm and somewhat lightheaded, suggesting that their physiological responses to the environmental modifications were different from my own. The consistency of their comfort levels with conditions that were challenging for me indicated either careful medical screening of meeting participants or the possibility that they shared biological characteristics that required different environmental parameters than normal human physiology. The meeting itself proceeded according to normal governmental consultation protocols for approximately 45 minutes, with participants discussing policy matters and interagency coordination issues, using familiar terminology and decision-making processes that were consistent with what I had observed during previous security assignments. Deputy Secretary Webb contributed to the discussion with the kind of informed analysis and strategic thinking that I had come to expect from senior defense officials, and his interaction patterns with other participants suggested normal professional relationships and communication dynamics. However, as the environmental conditions in the conference room continued to intensify, with temperature levels rising to what felt like the mid-80s and humidity increasing to levels that were making my protective equipment uncomfortable to wear, I began to notice subtle changes in the behavior and physical appearance of meeting participants that were difficult to identify or categorize using normal observational frameworks. The changes were gradual and initially so subtle that I questioned whether I was observing actual modifications in their appearance or whether the unusual environmental conditions were affecting my perception and judgment in ways that were creating false impressions of physical alterations that weren't actually occurring. "Agent Rodriguez," Deputy Secretary Webb said during a break in the meeting discussion, "the atmospheric conditions in this facility sometimes affect people differently. So you should let me know if you're experiencing any discomfort or perceptual difficulties." His consideration for my well-being was professional and appropriate, but the way he phrased his concern about perceptual difficulties suggested that changes in perception were expected consequences of the environmental conditions rather than unusual side effects that required medical attention. The first unmistakable change I observed occurred approximately 1 hour into the meeting, when Deputy Secretary Webb's facial features began to display alterations that were too significant and too systematic to be attributed to lighting conditions, environmental stress, or perceptual problems on my part. His skin texture seemed to be developing a subtle but clearly visible pattern that looked more like scales than normal human skin, while his eye structure appeared to be changing in ways that affected both the shape of his pupils and the reflective properties of his irises. The modifications were gradual but consistent, progressing from barely perceptible variations in surface texture to clearly visible changes that transformed his appearance from recognizably human to something that combined human and reptilian characteristics in ways that should have been biologically impossible. The environmental conditions in this facility, he explained, apparently aware that his physical appearance was undergoing changes but treating them as normal and expected rather than alarming or unusual, allow participants to operate at optimal physiological efficiency during extended policy discussions. His voice maintained the same professional tone and authoritative presence I had come to expect from senior defense officials, but the sounds seemed to be produced by vocal structures that were different from those that had generated his normal speech patterns during our previous interactions. As I watched in growing disbelief and confusion, his transformation continued to progress, revealing characteristics that were clearly reptilian rather than mammalian, including skin texture, eye structure, and facial proportions that belonged to a species that wasn't human, despite his retention of human clothing, mannerisms, and governmental authority. My initial response to witnessing Deputy Secretary Webb's transformation was to assume that I was experiencing some form of hallucination, psychological breakdown, or adverse reaction to the unusual environmental conditions in the conference room, rather than accepting the possibility that I was observing actual physical changes that violated basic principles of human biology and species classification. The rational part of my mind insisted that people don't transform from human to reptilian appearance during government meetings, that my 15 years of security experience had never included exposure to shape-shifting government officials, and that the most logical explanation for what I was observing was that the environmental stress, extended work hours, and psychological pressure of Project Serpentina assignments were affecting my mental stability and perceptual accuracy. "Agent Rodriguez," said Deputy Secretary Webb, whose appearance now clearly displayed reptilian characteristics while maintaining human clothing and professional behavior. "Some individuals require time to adjust to the specialized environmental conditions used in these facilities." His tone carried the kind of patient understanding that suggested he had observed similar reactions from security personnel before, but the cognitive dissonance of receiving reassurance from someone whose physical appearance had shifted to reptilian characteristics made it impossible to process his words using normal psychological frameworks. I found myself trying to focus on maintaining professional composure and security protocols, while simultaneously questioning whether I was witnessing impossible biological phenomena or experiencing a complete breakdown of my ability to accurately perceive and interpret reality. The conflict between my professional training, which required me to maintain operational effectiveness regardless of unusual circumstances, and my personal need to understand what was happening to my perception of reality, created a psychological tension that made it difficult to function according to either professional or personal decision-making processes. The continuation of the meeting with Deputy Secretary Webb and other participants conducting normal governmental business while displaying clearly reptilian physical characteristics forced me to confront the possibility that my observations were accurate and that I was witnessing events that challenged fundamental assumptions about human biology, government operations, and the nature of the people in positions of political and administrative authority. The other meeting participants seemed completely comfortable with Webb's transformed appearance and continued to interact with him using normal professional courtesy and governmental protocols, suggesting that his reptilian characteristics were familiar and acceptable rather than alarming or unexpected. Their casual acceptance of his non-human appearance indicated either that they were also experiencing the same hallucinations that I thought might be affecting my perception, or that they were aware of and comfortable with the reality of his true nature, and were accustomed to conducting business with beings who appeared reptilian rather than human. "The discussion topics for today's meeting," Webb continued, his voice now clearly produced by vocal structures that were reptilian rather than human, "require optimal cognitive function and enhanced sensory capabilities that are more easily achieved when participants can operate according to their natural physiological parameters. His explanation suggested that the ability to appear human was a disguise that required energy and concentration to maintain, and that the specialized environment of the facility allowed him to function in his true form while conducting business that required human knowledge and institutional access. The implications of his explanation raised questions about how many other government officials might be reptilian beings operating under human disguises, and whether my previous security assignments had involved protecting people whose true nature had been concealed by environmental conditions that prevented their transformation, or by my own lack of awareness about the reality of their biological characteristics. The practical challenges of maintaining professional security protocols while witnessing transformations that challenged my understanding of reality forced me to develop new operational frameworks that could accommodate both my responsibility to protect the meeting participants and my need to process information that exceeded anything covered in conventional security training. My primary obligation was to ensure that the meeting proceeded without interference from unauthorized personnel or security threats, regardless of the unusual physical characteristics displayed by the people I was assigned to protect. However, the reptilian features that Deputy Secretary Webb and other participants were displaying raised questions about what constituted normal security parameters when the people being protected weren't entirely human and might have capabilities or vulnerabilities that weren't addressed in standard protective protocols. "Agent Rodriguez," Webb said, apparently noticing my difficulty in adapting to the situation, "security procedures for these meetings are the same as for conventional governmental consultations, but you should understand that participants may have enhanced sensory capabilities and threat detection abilities that supplement rather than replace standard security measures." His guidance suggested that the reptilian beings I was protecting possessed abilities that exceeded normal human limitations, which could either make my security role easier due to their enhanced awareness, or more complicated due to their possession of capabilities that I couldn't understand or coordinate with effectively. The challenge of providing effective protection for beings whose abilities and vulnerabilities were unknown to me required adapting my security procedures in real time while maintaining the professional composure necessary for effective threat assessment and response coordination. The conclusion of the meeting and Deputy Secretary Webb's gradual return to human appearance provided me with an opportunity to observe the transformation process in reverse, confirming that the changes I had witnessed were systematic and controlled, rather than random or pathological alterations in his biological structure. As the environmental conditions in the conference room returned to normal temperature and humidity levels, his reptilian characteristics gradually faded and were replaced by the familiar human appearance that I remembered from our previous professional interactions. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or magical, but rather seemed to involve conscious control over biological processes that allowed him to modify his physical appearance according to environmental conditions and operational requirements. "Agent Rodriguez," he said, as his appearance completed its return to normal human characteristics, "the specialized nature of Project Serpentina operations requires security personnel who can maintain professional effectiveness when exposed to information and situations that aren't covered in conventional training programs." His tone carried the same authoritative presence I had come to expect from senior defense officials, but his words carried implications about the nature of my future assignments that made it clear that witnessing transformations would become a routine aspect of my security responsibilities, rather than an unusual occurrence that required special explanation or psychological adjustment. "Your performance today demonstrates the kind of adaptability and professional composure that makes you valuable for assignments involving participants who have unique operational requirements," he continued. "Your security clearance is being upgraded to include access to information about the specialized capabilities and security needs of individuals who operate within human governmental and corporate institutions, while maintaining concealed biological characteristics that require discretionary protection protocols." The ride back to Deputy Secretary Webb's residence provided me with time to process the implications of what I had witnessed and to begin developing new operational frameworks that could accommodate the reality of providing security for beings who were capable of appearing human but whose true nature was reptilian. The transformation I had observed was clearly not a hallucination, psychological breakdown, or adverse reaction to environmental conditions, but rather a systematic biological capability that allowed reptilian beings to function within human institutions while maintaining false identities that concealed their true species and objectives. Agent Rodriguez, Webb said during our return journey, the information you've been exposed to today represents one of the most closely guarded secrets in government operations, and your continued involvement will require complete discretion and absolute loyalty to the individuals and operations you'll be assigned to protect. His tone carried the kind of serious authority that accompanied classified briefings involving national security implications, but his words also carried personal implications about my future career trajectory and the degree to which my life would be affected by knowledge of reptilian infiltration of human governmental institutions. Your next assignments, he continued, will involve providing security for operations that require protection of participants whose safety depends on maintaining the secrecy of their true nature and the confidentiality of their activities within human political and corporate structures. As we approached his residence and prepared to conclude what had been the most significant assignment of my security career, I realized that I had crossed a threshold from conventional government protection work into a role that involved guarding secrets that were far more important than anything covered in standard security protocols, and that my future assignments would require me to protect beings whose existence challenged everything I thought I knew about human civilization and the nature of political and corporate leadership in American society. The decision to begin my own investigation into the patterns I had observed during Project Serpentina assignments was driven by a professional need to understand the security requirements and operational parameters of the people I was assigned to protect, rather than any conscious intention to uncover classified information or challenge the authority of my superiors. My 15 years of government security experience had taught me that effective protection required comprehensive understanding of client behaviors, threat profiles, and environmental factors that could affect the safety and operational effectiveness of high-value targets. However, the unusual characteristics I had witnessed during recent assignments exceeded anything covered in conventional security analysis training, and the official briefings I had received provided only superficial information about the specialized requirements of Project Serpentina participants. Effective security protocols, I told myself, as I began systematically reviewing the personnel files and operational records available through my upgraded clearance level, require detailed knowledge of client patterns, vulnerabilities, and operational requirements that can only be developed through careful analysis of available information. The rationalization helped me justify what was essentially unauthorized intelligence gathering about people whose true nature and objectives were clearly more complex and more significant than anything I had been told during official briefings. My investigation began with publicly available information and official personnel records, but it quickly expanded to include databases and information sources that required careful use of my security credentials to avoid triggering monitoring systems that might alert my superiors to my unofficial research activities. The scheduling patterns for Project Serpentina participants revealed immediately that their public appearances and official governmental activities followed constraints that were inconsistent with normal human circadian rhythms and professional scheduling requirements. Senator Patricia Williams, whose transformation I had witnessed during the Level 7 meeting, never appeared at public events, press conferences, or official hearings that were scheduled before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m., despite the fact that congressional business often required early morning or evening participation that was considered routine for other senators. Deputy Secretary of Defense Marcus Webb similarly avoided daytime appearances that occurred during peak sunlight hours, preferring meetings and public events that were scheduled for late morning or early afternoon periods when indoor lighting could be controlled and natural sunlight exposure could be minimized. The consistency of these scheduling constraints across different Project Serpentina participants suggested either medical conditions that required limited exposure to certain environmental conditions, or biological characteristics that made specific time periods optimal for public appearances and professional activities. The scheduling patterns, I noted in my personal research files, indicate systematic avoidance of environmental conditions rather than random preferences or normal variations in individual schedule management. The implications of coordinated scheduling constraints that were shared by multiple high-ranking officials suggested either careful medical management of shared health conditions or the possibility that their biological characteristics required specific environmental parameters for maintaining their human appearance and optimal public performance. The medical records that were accessible through my security clearance revealed anomalies that were impossible to reconcile with normal human physiology, aging patterns, and health management requirements for people in high-stress governmental and corporate positions. Senator Williams' medical files indicated a complete absence of common health problems that typically affected people in their 60s who had spent decades in high-pressure political careers, including cardiovascular issues, stress-related conditions, and age-related physiological changes that were considered inevitable for people in her demographic category. More concerning were blood test results and physiological measurements that fell outside normal human ranges for temperature regulation, metabolism rates, and sensory capabilities, suggesting either access to medical treatments that exceeded anything available through conventional healthcare systems, or biological characteristics that differed significantly from normal human parameters. Deputy Secretary Webb's medical records showed similar anomalies, including body temperature measurements that were consistently several degrees higher than normal human ranges, blood chemistry results that indicated unusual mineral content and cellular characteristics, and sensory testing results that suggested visual and auditory capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. The medical data I documented in my investigation files indicates physiological characteristics that are either the result of advanced medical enhancement procedures or evidence of biological differences that distinguish these individuals from normal human populations. The consistency of unusual medical results across multiple Project Serpentina participants suggested systematic rather than coincidental variations from normal human physiology, raising questions about whether these individuals belonged to a distinct biological category or had undergone modifications that enhanced their capabilities beyond normal human limitations. The family history and biographical information for Project Serpentina participants included inconsistencies and gaps that became apparent only when cross-referenced against multiple databases and historical records that weren't normally accessible for routine background investigations. Senator Williams' family genealogy showed a clear lineage extending back to the early 1800s, but detailed examination of historical records revealed that several of her supposed ancestors had biographical information that was inconsistent with period documentation, including birth and death dates that didn't align with cemetery records, military service records that couldn't be verified through historical archives, and property ownership documentation that showed impossible patterns of geographic movement and financial transactions. The discrepancies were subtle enough that they wouldn't be detected during normal background investigations, but systematic analysis revealed patterns that suggested either deliberate falsification of historical records or the possibility that her family lineage included individuals whose existence had been concealed or misrepresented in official documentation. The biographical inconsistencies, I noted, indicate either sophisticated identity manipulation extending across multiple generations, or evidence that some family members possessed characteristics that required concealment from normal historical documentation processes. Similar patterns appeared in the family histories of other Project Serpentina participants, suggesting coordinated efforts to obscure or falsify biographical information that might reveal information about their true origins or the nature of their biological characteristics. The financial records and property ownership patterns for Project Serpentina participants revealed resource management and investment strategies that seemed designed to maintain assets and capabilities across much longer time periods than normal human career spans would suggest. Senator Williams owned properties in remote locations that had been held under various legal entities for periods extending back more than a century, with ownership transfers and management arrangements that allowed for continuous control, while avoiding the kind of public documentation that would normally accompany multi-generational property inheritance. The properties included facilities that were equipped with environmental control systems, underground installations, and specialized equipment that exceeded what would be expected for residential or recreational use. Deputy Secretary Webb's financial records showed investment patterns and asset management strategies that seemed designed to ensure access to resources and capabilities over extended time periods, including trust funds and corporate entities that had been established decades before his official entry into government service. The financial patterns, I documented, suggest resource management strategies designed for operational requirements that extend beyond normal human career timelines and life expectancy parameters. The long-term planning and resource allocation evident in their financial records indicated either exceptional foresight and strategic thinking, or the possibility that they were planning for operational requirements that would extend across time periods longer than normal human lifespans would accommodate. The residential and travel patterns for Project Serpentina participants included preferences and requirements that seemed designed to avoid environmental conditions and geographic locations that would be comfortable for normal human occupation, while favoring areas that provided specific climatic and atmospheric characteristics. Senator Williams maintained residences in desert regions of the southwestern United States, tropical areas with high humidity and temperature levels, and underground facilities that provided controlled atmospheric conditions independent of external weather patterns. Her travel schedules consistently avoided northern climates during winter months and high-altitude locations where atmospheric pressure and temperature conditions differed significantly from sea-level environments. Deputy Secretary Webb showed similar preferences for warm, humid environments and consistently avoided locations where natural lighting conditions were intense, or where atmospheric conditions included high oxygen content or low humidity levels. The environmental preferences, I noted in my research files, indicate biological requirements that favor climatic conditions that are optimal for reptilian rather than mammalian physiology. The consistency of environmental preferences that seemed designed for reptilian comfort rather than human recreational or professional requirements provided additional evidence that the Project Serpentina participants possessed biological characteristics that differed fundamentally from normal human environmental needs and physiological responses to different climatic conditions. The communication patterns and technological preferences of Project Serpentina participants included capabilities and equipment access that exceeded what was available through normal government or corporate technology procurement channels. Senator Williams used communication devices that incorporated encryption capabilities and transmission methods that weren't available through standard government communication systems, while her electronic security measures included biometric identification systems that analyzed characteristics beyond fingerprints and retinal patterns to include thermal signatures and electromagnetic readings that suggested additional biological verification methods. The sophistication of her personal technology indicated either access to classified military or intelligence equipment, or the availability of technological resources that exceeded what was available through normal governmental or commercial channels. Deputy Secretary Webb similarly used communication and security systems that incorporated capabilities not found in standard government equipment, including environmental monitoring systems for his residences and transportation vehicles that maintained specific atmospheric conditions and provided real-time analysis of external environmental factors. The technological capabilities, I documented, suggest access to equipment and systems that are designed for individuals whose security requirements and biological characteristics exceed normal human parameters. The advanced technology used by Project Serpentina participants indicated either exceptional security clearances that provided access to classified systems, or the existence of technological resources that were developed specifically for individuals whose operational requirements differed from those of normal human government officials. The social interaction patterns and professional relationship networks of Project Serpentina participants showed coordination and mutual support systems that extended beyond what would be expected from normal governmental or corporate professional associations. Senator Williams maintained regular contact with other Project Serpentina participants, even when their official responsibilities and committee assignments didn't require professional interaction, suggesting personal or operational relationships that were independent of their formal governmental roles. The frequency and intensity of their communication suggested shared interests and objectives that weren't documented in their official biographical or professional information. Deputy Secretary Webb similarly maintained contact networks that included Project Serpentina participants from different agencies and departments, with communication patterns that indicated coordination and planning activities that weren't related to their official governmental responsibilities. The relationship patterns, I noted, indicate organizational structures and mutual support systems that operate independent of official governmental hierarchy and administrative channels. The coordination evident in their personal and professional relationship networks suggested either informal associations based on shared interests and objectives, or the possibility that they belonged to organized groups that maintained operational coordination independent of their official government positions and responsibilities. The dietary habits and nutritional requirements of Project Serpentina participants included preferences and restrictions that were consistent with reptilian rather than mammalian metabolic requirements, despite their human appearance and normal participation in social and professional dining situations. Senator Williams consistently avoided foods that were high in certain types of proteins and carbohydrates that were considered normal components of human nutrition, while preferring dietary components that provided specific mineral and vitamin combinations that weren't typically emphasized in human nutritional planning. Her catering requirements for official events included specialized preparation methods and ingredient sources that ensured specific temperature and chemical composition parameters that seemed designed for metabolic systems that differed from normal human digestive and nutritional process. Deputy Secretary Webb showed similar dietary patterns, consistently requesting foods that were prepared using specific temperature and seasoning requirements that favored reptilian rather than mammalian taste preferences and digestive capabilities. The nutritional patterns, I documented in my investigation files, indicate metabolic requirements that are optimized for reptilian rather than human biological systems. The consistency of unusual dietary preferences and nutritional requirements across multiple Project Serpentina participants provided additional evidence that their biological characteristics required different nutritional inputs and metabolic processes than normal human physiology would suggest. As my investigation expanded to include more detailed analysis of the patterns I had identified, it became clear that the Project Serpentina participants weren't isolated individuals with unusual characteristics, but rather members of an organized group or species that was operating within human governmental and corporate institutions while maintaining false identities that concealed their true nature and objectives. The coordination evident in their scheduling patterns, environmental preferences, technological capabilities, and professional relationships suggested systematic organization and mutual support that extended beyond what would be possible for randomly associated individuals who happened to share unusual characteristics. The evidence indicates, I concluded in my personal research summary, that Project Serpentina participants represent a coordinated infiltration of human governmental institutions by beings whose biological characteristics are reptilian rather than human, and whose organizational capabilities and objectives exceed anything that individual action could accomplish. The implications of discovering evidence of systematic reptilian infiltration of government leadership positions raised questions about the extent of their influence, the nature of their long-term objectives, and the degree to which human governmental policy and decision-making was being controlled or influenced by non-human intelligence. As I prepared to conclude my investigation and determine what actions to take with the information I had gathered, I realized that my role as a Project Serpentina security agent had evolved from protecting unusual government officials to maintaining the security of an operation that involved the systematic infiltration and control of human civilization by an organized group of reptilian beings whose capabilities and objectives were far more sophisticated and far more dangerous than anything I had been prepared to encounter during my government security career. The discovery of the underground tunnel system began when I noticed that several Project Serpentina participants were accessing meetings and facilities through routes that didn't correspond to any building schematics or architectural plans that were available through my security clearance channels. During my investigation of Senator Williams's movement patterns, I observed her entering the basement level of the Hart Senate office building through a service corridor that led to what appeared to be a dead-end storage area, but security footage showed her remaining in that location for less than 3 minutes before emerging in a completely different building more than 8 blocks away. The timing was impossible for normal pedestrian travel, even using the most direct surface routes, and there were no official transportation records or vehicle assignments that could account for her rapid movement between locations that weren't connected by any known underground passages or secure transportation systems. The movement patterns, I noted in my investigation files, indicate access to transportation or passage methods that aren't documented in official building plans or security protocols. My analysis of similar anomalies in the travel patterns of other Project Serpentina participants revealed that they were consistently accessing locations through routes that seemed to bypass normal building entrances and exits, suggesting either advanced knowledge of undocumented architectural features or access to passage systems that weren't included in the building plans available to normal security personnel. The consistency of these movement patterns across different participants and different buildings indicated systematic, rather than coincidental access to transportation methods that were hidden from normal governmental oversight and security awareness. The investigation of the basement levels and sub-basement areas of government buildings where Project Serpentina participants conducted their activities required careful use of my security credentials to avoid triggering monitoring systems that might alert supervisors to my unauthorized exploration of areas that weren't included in my official assignment parameters. The Hart Senate office building's basement level included service corridors and mechanical areas that were consistent with normal government building infrastructure, but careful examination revealed several passages that extended beyond the areas shown in official architectural documents. Following one of these passages led me to a secure access point that required biometric identification systems more sophisticated than anything I had encountered in standard government facilities, including scanners that seemed to analyze thermal signatures and electromagnetic characteristics rather than just fingerprints and retinal patterns. The access control systems, I documented, indicate security measures that exceed standard government protocols and suggest facilities that require protection levels beyond what would be necessary for normal administrative or storage purposes. When I used my Project Serpentina credentials to gain access through the biometric scanners, I discovered that the passage continued much deeper underground than should have been possible given the foundation systems and utility infrastructure that were supposed to exist beneath the building. The passage walls were constructed from materials that looked like polished stone, but which seemed to be generating their own subtle illumination, while the engineering precision and construction techniques suggested capabilities that exceeded anything I had observed in conventional government building projects. The tunnel system that I discovered by following the passage beneath the Hart Senate office building was far more extensive and far more sophisticated than anything that could have been constructed using conventional excavation and construction methods without attracting attention from city planning authorities, utility companies, and the various oversight agencies that monitored federal building modifications and infrastructure development. The main tunnel was approximately 12 feet high and 8 feet wide, with smooth walls that appeared to be carved from a single piece of material rather than constructed from separate components, and the engineering precision required for maintaining structural integrity while excavating beneath established building foundations should have required construction projects that would have been impossible to conceal from normal governmental and municipal oversight processes. The tunnel extended in multiple directions from the access point beneath the Hart building, with branch passages that seemed to lead toward other government facilities in the Capitol Hill area, while lighting and ventilation systems provided environmental conditions that were more sophisticated than anything I had encountered in normal government building infrastructure. The construction techniques, I noted, represent engineering capabilities that exceed known excavation and tunnel construction methods, and the concealment of such extensive underground infrastructure indicates organizational capabilities that operate independent of normal governmental oversight and approval processes. The systematic nature of the tunnel construction and the sophisticated environmental controls suggested that the underground network had been planned and implemented as a comprehensive transportation and communication system, rather than a series of individual passages created for specific operational requirements. The technology that I encountered while exploring the tunnel system included equipment and systems that were clearly more advanced than anything available through normal government procurement channels, with capabilities that seemed designed for communication, environmental control, and transportation functions that exceeded what would be necessary for conventional underground passage systems. The walls of the main tunnel included what appeared to be communication interfaces that displayed information using symbols and patterns that didn't correspond to any governmental or technical documentation systems I had encountered during my security career, while environmental monitoring systems provided real-time data about atmospheric conditions, structural integrity, and what appeared to be biological presence detection that could identify and track the movement of individuals throughout the tunnel network. The transportation system consisted of platforms that moved along rails or guide systems that weren't visible, but which provided smooth, silent movement at speeds that exceeded anything I had experienced in conventional underground transportation systems. The technological capabilities, I documented, represent systems that are decades ahead of known government infrastructure and suggest access to equipment and engineering resources that aren't available through normal procurement and development channels. The sophistication of the communication and transportation systems indicated that the tunnel network was designed to support ongoing operational activities that required high levels of coordination and security, rather than serving as emergency evacuation routes or temporary passage systems for specific governmental functions. The branch passages that extended from the main tunnel led to access points beneath several major government buildings, including the Capitol Building, the Supreme Court, the White House complex, and various agency headquarters that housed senior officials from the departments and agencies where Project Serpentina participants held leadership positions. Each access point was equipped with the same sophisticated biometric security systems I had encountered at the Hart Building entrance, while the passages themselves included environmental controls and communication systems that maintained optimal atmospheric conditions and provided real-time coordination capabilities throughout the entire underground network. The scope of the tunnel system indicated that it had been designed to provide secure, concealed transportation and communication capabilities for individuals who needed to coordinate activities across multiple government facilities without using normal transportation systems or communication channels that would be subject to standard security monitoring and oversight procedures. The network connectivity, I noted in my investigation files, indicates systematic planning and construction that was designed to support coordinated activities involving senior officials from multiple government agencies and departments. The comprehensive nature of the underground infrastructure suggested that it had been constructed to support ongoing operational requirements that involved coordination and communication activities that needed to remain concealed from normal governmental oversight and public awareness. The equipment and systems that I discovered in various chambers and technical areas throughout the tunnel network included devices and capabilities that I couldn't identify using any reference materials or technical documentation that was available through my security clearance channels. Some chambers contained what appeared to be advanced communication equipment that incorporated display systems and interface methods that didn't correspond to any military or intelligence technology that I had encountered during my government career, while other areas included environmental control systems that seemed designed to maintain atmospheric conditions that were optimized for biological requirements that differed from normal human physiological needs. The most puzzling discoveries were devices that seemed to combine communication, monitoring, and environmental control functions using technological principles that I couldn't understand or categorize using conventional frameworks for analyzing electronic and mechanical systems. The equipment characteristics I documented indicate technological capabilities that are based on engineering principles and materials science that exceeds current human industrial and scientific capabilities. The presence of such advanced technology in facilities that were hidden from normal government oversight raised questions about who had designed and manufactured the equipment, how it had been installed without attracting attention from oversight agencies, and what operational purposes it was intended to support that required capabilities beyond what was available through normal government technology procurement channels. The communication systems that I discovered throughout the tunnel network included capabilities for coordinating activities and sharing information between different locations, using methods that seemed designed to avoid detection by normal government communication monitoring and intelligence analysis systems. The displays and interface systems provided real-time information about activities in various government buildings, including meeting schedules, personnel movements, and decision-making processes that weren't available through normal governmental information systems or intelligence channels. The sophistication of the information access and coordination capabilities suggested that the tunnel network was being used to monitor and influence governmental activities in ways that exceeded what would be possible through normal political and administrative processes. The communication capabilities, I noted, indicate systematic monitoring and coordination of government activities that operates independent of official channels and provides access to information and influence capabilities that exceed normal governmental oversight and transparency mechanisms. The comprehensive nature of the monitoring and coordination systems suggested that individuals with access to the tunnel network possessed capabilities for influencing governmental decision-making and policy development that weren't subject to normal democratic oversight and accountability processes. The environmental control systems throughout the tunnel network were specifically designed to maintain atmospheric conditions that were optimal for individuals whose physiological requirements differed from normal human environmental needs, with temperature, humidity, and atmospheric composition controls that created conditions similar to what I had observed during Project Serpentina meetings where participants had displayed reptilian characteristics. The air circulation systems maintained higher temperatures and humidity levels than would be comfortable for normal human occupation, while atmospheric monitoring systems tracked air composition parameters that seemed designed to ensure optimal conditions for reptilian rather than mammalian respiratory and metabolic systems. The environmental specifications I documented confirmed that the tunnel network was designed for use by individuals whose biological characteristics require atmospheric conditions that are optimized for reptilian rather than human physiology. The systematic nature of the environmental controls throughout the entire tunnel network indicated that all areas were designed to accommodate the same biological requirements, suggesting that the users of the system shared common physiological characteristics that differed from normal human environmental needs. The storage and staging areas that I discovered in various sections of the tunnel network contained equipment, supplies, and materials that seemed designed to support operational activities that weren't documented in any governmental procurement records or inventory systems that I could access through my security clearance channels. Some storage areas contained specialized protective equipment that looked similar to standard government security gear, but which incorporated features and capabilities that exceeded anything available through normal procurement channels, while other areas included what appeared to be specialized clothing and personal equipment that was designed for individuals whose physical characteristics differed from normal human body proportions and environmental requirements. The presence of supplies and equipment that were specifically designed for non-human users provided additional confirmation that the tunnel network was intended to support the operational activities of beings whose biological characteristics were reptilian rather than human. The supply characteristics, I noted, indicate systematic procurement and staging of equipment that is designed for individuals whose physical and physiological characteristics require specialized accommodation that isn't available through normal government supply and equipment channels. The comprehensive nature of the supply and equipment staging suggested that the tunnel network was supporting ongoing operational activities that involved significant numbers of individuals whose requirements exceeded what could be accommodated through normal government facilities and resources. As my exploration of the tunnel network concluded, it became clear that I had discovered evidence of infrastructure and capabilities that represented a comprehensive system for coordinating and supporting the activities of reptilian beings who were operating within human government institutions while maintaining concealed transportation, communication, and operational support systems that were independent of normal governmental oversight and accountability mechanisms. The scope and sophistication of the underground network indicated that it had been constructed over extended periods using resources and capabilities that exceeded what would be available through normal government construction and development processes, while the technological capabilities and environmental specifications confirmed that it was designed specifically to support the operational requirements of beings whose biological characteristics were reptilian rather than human. The tunnel network, I concluded in my investigation summary, represents comprehensive infrastructure that enables systematic infiltration and control of human government institutions by organized groups of reptilian beings whose capabilities and objectives exceed anything that could be accomplished through normal political and administrative processes. The discovery of such extensive underground infrastructure raised questions about how long the reptilian infiltration had been operating, what other cities and government installations might include similar systems, and whether human governmental decision-making was being controlled through coordination and communication capabilities that were completely hidden from democratic oversight and public awareness. As I prepared to determine what actions to take with the information I had gathered about the tunnel network, I realized that my role as a Project Serpentina security agent had evolved from protecting unusual government officials to maintaining the security of operations that involved comprehensive reptilian control of human governmental institutions using infrastructure and capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about democratic government and human political autonomy. The interception of communications between Project Serpentina participants occurred when a technical malfunction in the surveillance equipment I was using to monitor perimeter security inadvertently activated recording systems that captured conversation frequencies beyond normal human hearing ranges. During a routine security assignment at the underground facility beneath the Federal Reserve Building, my standard communication monitoring equipment began picking up signals that weren't coming from any of the authorized radio or telephone channels that I was supposed to be tracking for security purposes. The signals included complex acoustic patterns that sounded like a mixture of electronic data transmission and biological vocalizations, but which were clearly organized and systematic rather than random electromagnetic interference or equipment malfunction. The acoustic patterns, I noted as I attempted to analyze the unexpected signals, indicate organized communication using frequencies and modulation methods that aren't consistent with normal human speech or standard electronic communication systems. My attempts to adjust the equipment to filter out what I initially assumed was interference instead revealed that the signals were actually coherent communication taking place within the facility I was assigned to secure, but using methods that exceeded normal human vocal capabilities and electronic communication protocols. The realization that sophisticated communication was occurring within my security perimeter, using methods that I couldn't detect with standard monitoring equipment, raised serious questions about the adequacy of my security protocols and the possibility that I was failing to monitor activities that could represent security threats to the people I was assigned to protect. The linguistic analysis software that I used to attempt to decode the intercepted communications indicated that the acoustic patterns included structural elements that were consistent with organized language systems, but which incorporated vocal characteristics and frequency ranges that exceeded normal human speech capabilities. The software identified repeated patterns and systematic variations that suggested complex grammatical structures and vocabulary systems. But the fundamental acoustic characteristics were based on vocal mechanisms that could produce sounds and frequency combinations that were impossible for normal human vocal structures to generate. The communication patterns included harmonic resonances and subsonic frequency components that seemed designed for hearing capabilities that exceeded normal human auditory ranges, while the modulation and tempo characteristics suggested cognitive processing speeds that were significantly faster than normal human conversation patterns. The linguistic characteristics I documented in my analysis files indicate communication methods that are optimized for vocal and auditory capabilities that exceed normal human biological limitations. The sophistication of the language system, combined with the impossible vocal characteristics, provided compelling evidence that the communications were being generated by beings whose biological characteristics differed fundamentally from normal human speech and hearing capabilities. The systematic nature of the language pattern suggested that I was monitoring communications between members of a species that had developed complex linguistic systems optimized for their own biological characteristics rather than adapting to human communication limitations. The content analysis of the intercepted communications. Once I had developed methods for converting the acoustic patterns into readable text using specialized translation software, revealed discussions of operational activities and strategic planning that involved systematic monitoring and manipulation of human governmental and corporate decision-making processes. The conversations included detailed references to specific human officials who were being influenced or controlled through methods that weren't specified in the communications, but which clearly involved systematic infiltration of decision-making processes at levels that included cabinet-level positions, congressional leadership, and corporate executive roles. The participants discussed surface activities and human management protocols, using terminology that suggested they viewed human civilization as something to be monitored and controlled rather than participated in as equals or partners. The communication content, I noted, indicates systematic planning and coordination of activities that involve large-scale manipulation of human political and economic systems using infiltration and influence methods that operate independent of normal democratic and market-based decision-making processes. The casual manner in which the participants discussed controlling human activities and the sophisticated level of coordination evident in their planning indicated that I was monitoring communications between members of an organized group that possessed capabilities for systematic control of human civilization that exceeded anything that individual infiltrators or small groups could accomplish through conventional means. The identification of specific Project Serpentina participants as the sources of the intercepted communications confirmed that the people I had been assigned to protect weren't human government officials with unusual characteristics, but rather members of a non-human species that was operating within human institutions while maintaining false identities and concealed objectives. Voice pattern analysis software identified Senator Patricia Williams and Deputy Secretary Marcus Webb as participants in conversations that included detailed planning for influencing specific congressional votes, manipulating federal agency policy decisions, and coordinating with what were described as embedded assets in corporate and international governmental positions. The conversations revealed that their human identities were carefully constructed false personas that were maintained to provide access to governmental authority and decision-making capabilities, while their actual loyalty and operational objectives were directed towards species-level goals that involved systematic control of human civilization development. The participant identification, I documented, confirms that individuals holding senior positions in human government are actually members of a non-human species that is using false identities to gain access to political authority and decision-making capabilities for purposes that serve their species' interests rather than human governmental objectives. The systematic nature of their infiltration and the sophisticated level of coordination evident in their communications indicated that I was dealing with a comprehensive program of species-level infiltration rather than isolated individuals who happened to possess unusual characteristics or capabilities. The scope and sophistication of the infiltration program became apparent as I continued to monitor communications and developed better methods for translating and analyzing the intercepted conversations, revealing that the reptilian species had established operational control over governmental and corporate positions at levels that included national security, economic policy, international relations, and social policy development. The communications referenced embedded assets in positions that included Supreme Court justices, federal agency directors, congressional leadership roles, corporate executive positions, and international governmental organizations, suggesting that their infiltration extended across all branches of government and all sectors of human institutional leadership. The coordination evident in their communications indicated systematic planning and resource allocation that enabled them to influence human civilization development according to strategic objectives that were developed and implemented over timescales that exceeded normal human political and corporate planning horizons. The operational scope, I noted in my analysis, indicates systematic control of human institutional decision-making that operates at levels sufficient to direct civilization development according to strategic objectives that serve reptilian rather than human interests. The comprehensive nature of their infiltration and the sophisticated level of coordination evident in their planning suggested that human democratic and economic institutions were being operated according to reptilian strategic objectives rather than human citizen preferences and market-based decision-making processes. The strategic objectives discussed in the intercepted communications included long-term planning for managing human population development, technological advancement, and resource allocation according to parameters that would optimize Earth's planetary reptilian rather than human civilization. The conversations included detailed discussions of climate modification programs, agricultural development policies, and technological research priorities that were designed to create environmental and technological conditions that would favor reptilian physiology and social organization, while limiting human capabilities for independent technological and political development. The participants discussed sustainability protocols and population management initiatives, using terminology that suggested human civilization was being guided according to environmental and demographic parameters that would ensure optimal planetary conditions for reptilian rather than human long-term occupation. The strategic planning, I documented, indicates systematic management of human civilization development according to objectives that prioritize reptilian species interests over human civilization autonomy and development preferences. The long-term nature of their strategic planning and the comprehensive scope of their management activities suggested that human civilization had been under reptilian guidance for extended periods, with governmental and corporate policy decisions being influenced to serve reptilian strategic objectives rather than human citizen preferences and democratic decision-making processes. The technological capabilities discussed in the intercepted communications included access to scientific and engineering resources that exceeded anything available through normal human research and development institutions, with references to advancement programs and technological applications that were decades ahead of known human scientific capabilities. The participants discussed advanced implementation protocols and technology transfer procedures that involved introducing specific technological capabilities into human civilization according to schedules that were coordinated with reptilian strategic objectives rather than human research priorities and development timelines. The conversations indicated that many technological developments that were considered human achievements were actually the result of controlled technology transfer from reptilian sources, with implementation timing designed to support reptilian strategic objectives rather than optimal human technological development or social benefit. The technological control, I noted, indicates systematic management of human technological development according to reptilian strategic priorities rather than human scientific research and innovation capabilities. The level of technological control evident in their communications suggested that human scientific and engineering capabilities were being guided according to parameters that would ensure technological development served reptilian strategic objectives while limiting human capabilities for independent technological advancement that might threaten reptilian control of planetary resources and systems. The organizational structure described in the intercepted communications revealed that the reptilian infiltration operated according to hierarchical command systems that extended beyond Earth-based operations to include coordination with off-planet resources and strategic planning that involved interplanetary and possibly interstellar operational considerations. The participants referenced council directives and off-world coordination protocols that indicated their activities were being directed by authority structures that extended beyond Earth-based operations, while their planning included timelines and resource allocation strategies that suggested access to capabilities and strategic perspectives that exceeded anything that could be developed using Earth-based resources alone. The conversations indicated that Earth-based reptilian operations were part of a larger strategic program that involved multiple planetary systems and resource management activities that were coordinated across interstellar distances and timescales. The organizational scope, I documented, indicates that Earth-based reptilian operations are components of strategic programs that involve interplanetary and possibly interstellar resource management and civilization development activities. The interstellar scope of their organizational structure and strategic planning suggested that human civilization was being managed as part of resource development and strategic planning activities that involved multiple planetary systems and species-level objectives that exceeded anything that could be understood using Earth-based political and economic frameworks. The security protocols discussed in the intercepted communications included comprehensive methods for maintaining operational security and concealing reptilian activities from human detection, with specific procedures for managing human security personnel and limiting their access to information that might reveal the true nature and scope of reptilian operations. The participants discussed asset management protocols and security containment procedures that included methods for controlling human security personnel through graduated exposure to operational realities, with procedures for determining which individuals could be trusted with limited information and which individuals represented security risks that required elimination or memory modification. The conversations revealed that my own exposure to reptilian operational realities had been carefully planned and managed according to protocols that evaluated my psychological profile and professional capabilities to determine my suitability for continued involvement or my classification as a security threat requiring neutralization. The security management, I noted with growing alarm, indicates systematic evaluation and control of human security personnel, according to criteria that determine their continued usefulness or their classification as threats requiring elimination. The systematic nature of their security protocols and the casual manner in which they discussed elimination of security threats made it clear that my own safety depended on my continued usefulness to their operations and my ability to maintain operational security according to their requirements rather than my loyalty to human governmental institutions or democratic principles. As my analysis of the intercepted communications continued, it became clear that I had discovered evidence of systematic reptilian control of human civilization that operated at scales and sophistication levels that exceeded anything that could be resisted using normal human political, military, or social organization capabilities. The comprehensive nature of their infiltration, the advanced technological resources at their disposal, and the interstellar scope of their organizational structure indicated that human civilization was being managed according to reptilian strategic objectives that served species-level interests that exceeded human understanding or resistance capabilities. The communication analysis, I concluded in my investigation summary, provides definitive evidence that human governmental and corporate institutions are under systematic control by a reptilian species that possesses technological and organizational capabilities that exceed human resistance potential. The realization that I was a security asset serving reptilian rather than human interests, and that my continued survival depended on my usefulness to operations that involved systematic control of human civilization, forced me to confront the reality that my career in government security had been devoted to protecting the operational security of beings whose strategic objectives included the systematic management and control of human civilization according to parameters that served reptilian rather than human interests. As I prepared to determine what actions to take with the information I had gathered about the true nature and scope of reptilian operations, I understood that any decisions I made would need to account for the reality that resistance to reptilian control was probably impossible using human capabilities alone, and that my own survival would depend on either accepting my role as a security asset, serving reptilian interests, or finding ways to warn human civilization about threats that exceeded their ability to understand or resist using conventional political and military frameworks. If you're listening to this, you need to understand that what I've told you represents just the first layer of a truth so massive and so carefully hidden that most people's minds simply reject it as impossible. But I've seen it with my own eyes, protected their operations with my own hands, and learned that everything we think we know about our world, our governments, and our species is a carefully constructed lie. The question isn't whether this is real. The question is what you're going to do with this information, and whether you're prepared to hear the rest of the story when I release part 2. Because what comes next will change everything you think you know about what it means to be human.